What if your entire future, your career, your dreams, everything you've worked for, came down to a single song? For four young musicians from Sweden, that was exactly the situation they faced. Today we know them as ABBA, one of the best-selling, most iconic music groups in history. But what most people don't realize is just how close they were to never breaking through at all. In the early 1970s, Agnetha Fältskog, Björn Ulvaeus, Benny Andersson, and Anni-Frid Lyngstad were all talented in their own right. But their path to success was anything but certain. They had already tasted failure on the world stage, struggling to make any real impact outside of Sweden. The music industry was brutal. Radio stations weren't interested. International audiences didn't seem to care. And even within Sweden, some critics dismissed them as just another pop experiment, unlikely to survive. Behind the scenes, frustration was building. Financial pressures were mounting. The group had poured their time, energy, and money into music that seemed to go nowhere. There were moments when it seemed like giving up might actually make more sense. The dream they were chasing was starting to slip out of reach. But then, everything shifted. Because in the middle of that uncertainty, they took a massive risk. A risk that could have easily backfired and buried their careers for good. Instead, it led them to create a song that would not only change their lives, but completely rewrite the rules of pop music forever. The world had no idea what was coming. And neither did ABBA. Long before the world was singing along to Dancing Queen or Mamma Mia, ABBA was simply four talented individuals trying to find their place in a crowded, unforgiving industry. Björn and Benny were seasoned songwriters. Agnetha had already enjoyed some solo success in Sweden. Anni-Frid, known as Frida, had built her own following in local clubs. But together, they were still searching for that magic formula. At first, they called themselves Björn and Benny, Agnetha and Anni-Frid, not exactly the kind of name that screams international superstardom. They experimented with different sounds, blending Swedish folk influences with early pop melodies. In 1973, they released Ring Ring, a song that showed promise, and even performed well in Sweden and a few European countries. But it failed to generate the kind of global buzz they desperately needed. Their first attempt at the Eurovision Song Contest in 1973 also ended in disappointment. They didn't even make it to the finals. For many artists, that kind of setback would have been the end. Eurovision was one of the few platforms that could launch a European act onto the world stage, and ABBA had just missed their shot. Behind the scenes, the frustration was becoming hard to ignore. Managers, record labels, and even the group themselves began questioning whether their international dreams were realistic. Financial pressure was mounting. The cost of studio time, promotion, and touring was starting to strain their limited resources. They were betting everything on music, but the payoff just wasn't coming. And yet, despite the setbacks, they refused to give up. Instead, they went back into the studio, determined to find something different. Something that would finally cut through the noise. What they came up with next would not only change their lives, but would also shake the entire pop world to its core. With every setback piling up, ABBA reached a moment where most artists either give up or gamble everything. They chose the gamble. The question was simple. How could they finally stand out, not just in Sweden, but on the world stage? The answer came from their manager and mentor, Stig Andersson. Stig understood something that most European acts at the time ignored. Global audiences responded to English. If they wanted a real shot at international success, they couldn't limit themselves to Swedish lyrics. It was a risky move. Singing in English at Eurovision was still unusual, and there was no guarantee the European audience would embrace a group performing in a language that wasn't their own. But for ABBA, it was a risk worth taking. The next challenge was the song itself. Benny and Björn went back to their songwriting roots, determined to create something completely different from the soft, safe ballads that dominated the contest. They were inspired by the booming glam rock wave sweeping across Europe and the UK. Artists like T-Rex, David Bowie, and Sweet were setting a new standard for bold, energetic performances. ABBA wanted to tap into that energy, but still keep their signature pop melodies intact. They experimented for weeks, layering guitars, brass, and harmonies, drawing influence from the rich, full sound pioneered by producers like Phil Spector. They wanted Waterloo to sound like a wall of joy, bright, punchy, and impossible to ignore. The rhythm was infectious, the chorus instantly singable, and the lyrics completely unexpected. Instead of another typical love song, Waterloo used one of the most famous military defeats in history as a metaphor for surrendering to love. Comparing romance to Napoleon's downfall wasn't exactly a common theme in pop music, but that quirkiness was part of its genius. The word Waterloo stuck in people's heads, even if they didn't fully understand the historical reference. And once you heard the chorus, it was almost impossible not to hum it hours later. But ABBA didn't stop at the song. They knew Eurovision was as much about visuals as it was about sound. They carefully planned their entire stage presentation, down to the smallest detail. Glittering outfits, platform boots, outrageous patterns, everything was designed to dazzle the television audience watching across Europe. Benny's Napoleon-inspired costume added a playful nod to the song's title, making the entire performance feel like a pop spectacle unlike anything Eurovision had seen before. In the end, they weren't just trying to win a contest. They were trying to make a statement. This was their shot to break free from years of struggle and finally prove they belonged on the world stage. The amount of pressure riding on that one performance was enormous. A failure at Eurovision would have likely crushed their momentum completely. But if they pulled it off, everything could change in a single night. As the contest approached, the tension was unbearable. But when ABBA finally stepped onto the stage in Brighton on the night of April 6, 1974, the world was about to witness a performance that would make history. April 6, 1974. Brighton, England. Eurovision was one of the biggest television events in Europe, drawing millions of viewers from dozens of countries. For many artists, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to perform in front of an audience far larger than any concert stage could offer. But for ABBA, it was more than just a chance. It was their make-or-break moment. The competition that year was fierce. Popular acts from across Europe were bringing their best songs, hoping to capture the votes of the international juries. And ABBA? They were the outsiders. A Swedish group performing in English with a glittering glam rock-inspired song that sounded nothing like the ballads Eurovision fans were used to hearing. Many weren't sure how their bold style would be received. But from the moment ABBA stepped onto that stage, everything changed. The cameras opened to the sight of Benny in his sparkling blue Napoleon-inspired jacket, Anni-Frid and Agnetha glowing in their futuristic glam rock outfits, and Björn wielding his guitar like a rock star on a mission. They didn't just perform Waterloo, they owned it. The energy was electric. The harmonies were tight. The infectious beat immediately set them apart from the other competitors that night. The crowd responded instantly. Even among the more reserved Eurovision audience, you could feel a shift. This wasn't the typical formula they were used to. It was colorful, loud, fun, and most importantly, unforgettable. Behind the scenes, though, nerves were high. ABBA knew that the Eurovision voting system was unpredictable and brutal. As the votes started rolling in, the tension backstage was unbearable. One by one, the countries announced their scores. Early results were mixed. A few high scores, a few lower ones. For a brief moment, it looked like their gamble might not pay off. But then, the tide turned. The high scores kept coming, country after country, as the juries across Europe couldn't deny the sheer force of Waterloo. By the time the final scores were tallied, it was official. ABBA had won the 1974 Eurovision Song Contest, becoming the first Swedish act to ever take the crown. Their bold gamble had paid off, and not just with a victory, but with a performance that would go down as one of the most iconic moments in Eurovision history. But the real shock? This was only the beginning. Winning Eurovision was one thing. What happened after would take ABBA far beyond anything they had ever imagined. Because Waterloo wasn't just a winning song, it was about to become a global phenomenon. When the final vote was read and ABBA was declared the winner, everything changed instantly. Overnight, they went from local Swedish hopefuls to international sensations. But as big as winning Eurovision was, even they couldn't have predicted what would happen next. Waterloo didn't just win the contest. It exploded across the global charts. Within weeks, the song hit #1 in multiple countries across Europe, including the UK, Germany, Norway, and Belgium. Even markets that had largely ignored their earlier work were now paying attention. Radio stations that previously passed on ABBA's singles were now playing Waterloo on repeat. The song's infectious melody, driving rhythm, and playful lyrics made it impossible to ignore. But perhaps the most shocking breakthrough came in America. For years, breaking into the US market had been nearly impossible for most European acts, let alone one from Sweden. But Waterloo defied expectations, climbing all the way to #6 on the US Billboard Hot 100. That single chart position opened doors that had been firmly shut to them before. And ABBA didn't waste the momentum. They quickly recorded versions of Waterloo in multiple languages, including German and French, allowing them to dominate markets that most English-speaking acts couldn't touch. It was a smart business move, but more importantly, it solidified their image as a true global act. Suddenly, ABBA was everywhere. On television, in magazines, on tour. Their unique blend of catchy melodies, tight harmonies, and polished image made them stand out in an industry filled with copycats. But what really set behind the scenes, record labels who once doubted them were now lining up with offers. Their management team carefully plotted their next moves, ensuring they capitalized on the massive exposure Waterloo had created. And while some might have seen Eurovision as the peak, for ABBA, it was just the launching pad. What came next would cement their place in music history, and no one saw it coming. Waterloo had cracked the door open. What ABBA did next would blow it wide open. With the world's attention finally locked on them, ABBA entered what can only be described as a golden era. The success of Waterloo wasn't a one-off. It laid the foundation for a string of hits that would dominate charts for the next decade. Songs like SOS, Fernando, Take a Chance on Me, and of course, Dancing Queen, which became their first and only US #1, turned ABBA into one of the biggest pop groups on the planet. By the late 1970s, ABBA wasn't just a successful band, they were a global phenomenon. Their albums sold millions, their concerts sold out worldwide, and their polished image became instantly recognizable across continents. They were no longer fighting for attention, they were setting the standard. But what made their rise so unique was where they came from. Before ABBA, very few artists from Sweden had ever broken into the global pop scene. The music industry was dominated by American, British, and a handful of European acts. ABBA shattered that mold, proving that great music could come from anywhere, and in doing so, they opened the door for countless Scandinavian artists who followed in their footsteps. Their influence extended far beyond record sales. ABBA reshaped the entire landscape of pop music. Their meticulously produced songs, tight harmonies, and infectious hooks became the blueprint for modern pop songwriting. Even today, decades later, you can hear echoes of their influence in countless artists across multiple genres. But their impact wasn't limited to just music. ABBA became a cultural force, inspiring musicals like Mamma Mia, which spawned successful stage productions and blockbuster films, introducing their music to entirely new generations. Their songs weren't just catchy, they became timeless anthems that crossed age, language, and culture. And just when it seemed like their story had reached its natural end, ABBA pulled off one of the most unexpected moves in music history. Even after their official hiatus in the early 80s, ABBA's influence refused to fade. Instead, their music quietly became part of the fabric of pop culture, living on in ways that no one could have predicted. Throughout the decades, Waterloo and their other hits continued to appear in films, commercials, and covers by artists around the world. But it wasn't just nostalgia. It was the timeless appeal of their songwriting, the kind that makes people of all ages sing along decades later. The real resurgence came with the 1999 debut of Mamma Mia, the jukebox musical built entirely around ABBA's catalog. It wasn't just a stage show. It was a cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, ABBA's songs were being rediscovered by a new generation of fans, many of whom had never even heard the original records before. The story, woven cleverly around those hits, gave the music fresh life and new meaning. From London's West End to Broadway, Mamma Mia ran for years, breaking records and winning hearts. Then came Mamma Mia films in 2008 and 2018, starring Hollywood stars like Meryl Streep and Pierce Brosnan. These movies made ABBA's music global once more, though with a modern twist that connected with younger viewers and brought the band's legacy to the biggest screens in the world. Soundtracks soared in sales, streaming numbers exploded, and the band's image was plastered everywhere, reminding the world that ABBA was far more than a relic of the past. But perhaps the most astonishing moment was their unexpected comeback in 2021. After nearly 40 years of silence, ABBA announced not just a reunion, but brand new music. The shock sent waves through the music industry. No one saw it coming. What's more, they embraced cutting-edge technology to do it. Instead of traditional concerts, ABBA unveiled ABBA Voyage, a virtual concert experience featuring digital avatars of the band performing on stage. It was a futuristic way to celebrate their past while pushing into the future. This revival wasn't just about cashing in on nostalgia. It was a statement that ABBA's music still resonates, still matters. Their melodies, harmonies, and storytelling have an evergreen quality that transcends time and trends. Whether through the emotional highs of The Winner Takes It All or the joyous bounce of Dancing Queen, ABBA's songs continue to connect with listeners on a deep, emotional level. More than just music, ABBA's story is a testament to resilience and reinvention. From their rocky beginnings and the gamble with Waterloo, to their reign as pop icons, and now as pioneers of digital performance, ABBA shows us how one bold song can spark a legacy that lasts forever, and how reinvention can keep that legacy alive for generations to come. ABBA's journey shows us just how transformative one song can be. Waterloo wasn't simply a catchy Eurovision entry, it was a bold leap into the unknown. A risk that could have ended in disaster, but instead launched one of the most remarkable success stories in music history. At a time when the group was struggling to find their place, that single track changed everything. It opened doors, shattered expectations, and transformed four hopeful musicians from relative obscurity into international superstars virtually overnight. But the story of Waterloo goes beyond just ABBA's personal triumph. It marked a cultural shift. Before Waterloo, Sweden was not known as a global pop powerhouse. The song helped put Swedish music on the map and paved the way for future artists, from Roxette to Avicii to Zara Larsson, proving that with the right song and vision, artists from anywhere can conquer the world. What makes Waterloo truly timeless is its blend of infectious energy, clever storytelling, and innovative production. It combined the spirit of glam rock with pop sensibility, creating a sound that was fresh and accessible yet sophisticated. The song's metaphor of surrender, framed through a historical reference, gave it a quirky, memorable edge that set it apart from anything else on the radio. This unique mix made it easy for people from different countries and cultures to connect with, sing along to, and remember long after the contest ended. More than 50 years later, Waterloo still resonates. It's not just a nostalgic relic, it's a living piece of music history that continues to inspire artists and listeners around the world. The ongoing popularity of ABBA's music, their surprising recent revival, and the enduring success of Mamma Mia prove that great songs never truly fade. They have the power to cross generations, connect strangers, and evoke emotions that never grow old. Ultimately, ABBA's story and the success of Waterloo remind us of something bigger. That music is more than entertainment. It's a force that can change lives. It teaches us that sometimes all it takes is one bold moment, one perfect song, to rewrite your destiny and leave a mark that lasts forever. So, next time you hear that opening riff or sing along to the chorus, remember, Waterloo didn't just win a contest, it saved a band, launched a legacy, and took the world by storm.